It is 2:25 in the morning, and a 1966 Buick Electra is moving fast through the Louisiana dark. The road is US Highway 90, a narrow two-lane strip that cuts through miles of marshland west of the Rigolette's Bridge. Locals call one of its curves Dead Man's Curve. In the front seat are 3 adults. In the back, 3 children sleep. 4 chihuahuas are somewhere in the car. The woman in the front passenger seat has, at various times in her 34 years, been called the most famous blonde in America, the working man's Monroe, the girl who can't help it. She has been on the cover of more than 2,500 magazines. She has been photographed more often than the president. She has claimed an IQ of 163. She has played Vivaldi on the violin on the Ed Sullivan Show. She speaks 5 languages. Earlier tonight, she performed 2 shows at a supper club in Biloxi, Mississippi, and the employees said it was her best show yet. Now, she is heading to New Orleans for a television appearance in the morning. She called her ex-husband from a gas station phone booth a short while ago. He told her he was flying down to see the children. Through the receiver, he could hear the voice of the man sitting beside her, the man who hits her, the man she cannot leave. Ahead, a tractor-trailer has slowed to 35 miles an hour. A mosquito-fogging truck is spraying insecticide across the road, and a thick white chemical cloud hangs in the hot night air. The Buick's driver, a 19-year-old named Ronnie Harrison, does not see the truck until it is too late. At somewhere between 60 and 80 miles an hour, the car slides under the trailer's rear. The top of the Buick is sheared clean off. 3 adults die instantly. The 3 children in the back seat survive with minor injuries. One of them, the youngest, a girl of 3 with a zigzag scar that will remain on her head for the rest of her life, will grow up to become one of the most famous actresses in America. She will have almost no memory of her mother. In the wreckage, photographers will find what appears to be a mass of blonde hair on the crumpled windshield. The rumor will spread, and it will never fully die, that Jayne Mansfield was decapitated in the crash. She was not. The blonde mass was a wig, or a hairpiece. She was a natural brunette after all, which is something most people never knew about her. And that is really the whole point of this story. Almost nothing about Jayne Mansfield was what it appeared to be. To understand how she ended up on that road, in that car, in the middle of the night, with a violent man beside her and her children asleep in the back, we need to go all the way back to the beginning, to a 3-year-old girl in a car with her father on an ordinary afternoon. Vera Jane Palmer was born on April 19, 1933, at Bryn Mawr Hospital in Pennsylvania, the only child of Herbert William Palmer, a lawyer, and Vera Jeffrey Palmer, a schoolteacher. Both parents were born with the surname Palmer, though they were not closely related. The family lived in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, where Herbert practiced law alongside a young attorney named Robert Minor, who would later become the governor of New Jersey. They were comfortable people, educated and respectable, of mostly English and Cornish ancestry with some German. Herbert played music. Vera was strict but devoted. Jayne, as the family called her, took violin lessons and piano lessons and performed little concerts in the driveway for the neighbors, a child standing in the sunlight with a small instrument, playing for anyone who would stop and listen. In 1936, when Jayne was 3 years old, Herbert Palmer went for a routine physical. He was 30 years old. He was declared healthy. Several hours later, while driving with his wife and daughter in the car, he suffered a massive heart attack and died at the wheel. Jayne was in the back seat when it happened. She was 3 years old, and she was in a car when her father died. 31 years later, she would be in a car again. Years later, in one of those rare moments when the mask of the bombshell slipped and the girl from Phillipsburg showed through, she said, "Something went out of my life. My earliest memories are the best. I always try to remember the good times when Daddy was alive." She would sit on his lap, she remembered, and he would stroke her long curly hair. It was before she dyed it. It was before everything. Her mother eventually remarried to a sales engineer named Harry Lawrence Piers, a firm but kind man whom Jayne grew fond of. he brought discipline and stability back to the household, and Jayne later expressed gratitude for the sense of family he restored. The household moved to Dallas, Texas, where Jayne settled into a middle-class life, attending Highland Park High School. She was, by the standards of suburban Dallas in the 1940s, an unusually accomplished girl. She studied German and Spanish and French. She took viola lessons in addition to the violin and piano she already played. She won beauty contests with titles that sounded like they had been invented for a press release: Miss Photo Flash, Miss Magnesium Lamp, Miss Fire Prevention Week. The only title she turned down was Miss Roquefort Cheese because, as she later said, it just didn't sound right. She also declined Miss Prime Rib. She was learning even then to manage the brand. She was, depending on which test you believe, somewhere between very smart and extraordinarily smart. She claimed an IQ of 163. Biographer Eve Golden has called that figure publicity fluff, though other sources place her tested IQ at 149, which is still well above genius level. She attended the University of Texas at Austin, where she studied drama and, by some accounts, physics. She later studied at Southern Methodist University and eventually at UCLA. Whichever number was accurate, there was no question that Vera Jane Palmer was a bright, driven, linguistically gifted young woman who read voraciously, wrote long letters, and was, according to people who knew her, an excellent conversationalist. She told a reporter years later, "I had better than a B+ average at the University of Texas, but with most men, you must conceal your brain." That sentence contains the entire architecture of what would become Jayne Mansfield's career, and eventually her tragedy. She understood, probably before she understood anything else about Hollywood, that the world would pay for her body and ignore her mind, and she decided, consciously, strategically, with the calculation of a chess player, to give the world exactly what it would pay for. She dyed her brown hair platinum blonde. She exaggerated her already ample figure. She developed a breathy, cooing voice that replaced whatever Texas accent she naturally possessed. She invented the character of Jayne Mansfield, and she played that character so completely and so convincingly that eventually nobody, not the studios, not the press, not even the men who married her, could find the woman underneath, including perhaps the woman herself. But first, before all of that, she was a teenage bride. On Christmas Eve, 1949, at a party in Dallas, 16-year-old Jayne met Paul Mansfield, a 20-year-old student at Sunset High School. He was handsome and studious and treated her with genuine respect. They fell in love quickly, with the intensity that comes from being very young. They married in early 1950. Some sources say January 28th in a secret ceremony, others say May 6th in Fort Worth, when she was still in high school. She was already 3 months pregnant. In June 1950, she graduated from Highland Park High School. On November 8, 1950, after a difficult labor, 17-year-old Jayne gave birth to her first daughter, Jayne Marie Mansfield. Paul Mansfield hoped that motherhood would settle his young wife's ambitions. But Jayne Mansfield was not the kind of woman whose ambitions could be settled by anything. She loved the baby, but her dream had been burning since she was 13 years old, since a childhood vacation to Los Angeles with her mother. When she had seen the studios and the palm trees and the impossibly glamorous world of the movies and decided that she would live there someday. She later said that her childhood idol had been Shirley Temple, the ultimate proof that a girl from nowhere could become the center of everything. When Paul was drafted for the Korean War, Jayne threw herself into local theater in Dallas, appearing in productions of The Slaves of Demon Rum and 10 Nights in a Barroom. She and Paul both participated in a production of Macbeth. She also appeared in a local staging of Anything Goes. In 1953, she acted in a local production of Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman that was good enough to attract attention from a talent scout at Paramount Pictures, who offered her an audition. When Paul came home from the service, Jayne made him keep a promise he had made before leaving. If she waited for him, he would take her to Hollywood. The family loaded up and moved to California in 1954. Paul lasted 4 months. He could see what was happening. His wife transforming herself, dyeing her hair, cultivating a persona that had nothing to do with the girl he had married on Christmas break, and he wanted no part of it. They separated, and he went back to Dallas. Their divorce would not be finalized until January 8, 1958, but the marriage was over the day Paul left. Jayne kept the name Mansfield. She thought it sounded illustrious. It was her first act of self-invention, keeping a married name from a marriage she had already left behind because the name itself was useful. The name was part of the brand. In Hollywood, she got a job as a part-time model at the Blue Book agency, the same agency that had once represented a young Norma Jean Baker before she became Marilyn Monroe. Mansfield also worked as a photographer at a nightclub owned by swimmer Esther Williams. She landed a few bit parts: a cigarette girl in Pete Kelly's Blues, a walk-on in Hell on Frisco Bay, a small role in Illegal. But nothing that would have made anyone remember her name. She was one of hundreds of pretty girls circling the same dozen casting offices, and she knew it. Then, in January 1955, she did something that would define her career more than any role she would ever play. RKO Pictures was hosting a publicity event at a pool in Florida for the film Underwater, produced by Howard Hughes. Mansfield showed up uninvited, wearing a red bikini that was, by design, slightly too small. During a poolside photo session, her top fell off. Photographers captured the moment from every angle. The pictures ran in newspapers across the country. It was, in the language of the time, a wardrobe malfunction, and it was entirely calculated. Mansfield had not been invited to the event. She crashed it, positioned herself near the press pool, and let physics and fabric do the rest. This was the moment when the woman who would later be called the foremother of the Kardashians discovered her real gift. It was not acting. It was not singing, or dancing, or playing the violin, all of which she could do competently. Her gift was understanding, with a kind of predatory clarity, how the publicity machine worked. She studied it the way other actresses studied Stanislavski. She understood something that most of her contemporaries did not. In the 1950s, the camera was the career. It did not matter if you could act. It mattered if they could not stop photographing you. "The real stars are not good actors or actresses," she once said. "They're personalities." The bikini stunt worked spectacularly. Playboy came calling, and Mansfield appeared in a spread that would be the first of many. But the more important door that opened was on Broadway. In the fall of 1955, she was cast as Rita Marlowe, a vapid, voluptuous movie star in George Axelrod's comedy Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? The role was a blatant parody of Marilyn Monroe, and Mansfield threw herself into it with a kind of fearless self-awareness that audiences found irresistible. She played the dumb blonde so perfectly, so knowingly, that the audience was never quite sure whether the joke was on her or everyone else. In one famous scene, she appeared wearing nothing but a white towel. The reviews were strong. Variety called her a refreshing personality. She won the Theatre World Award for Most Promising Newcomer. The play ran for over a year, and 20th Century Fox paid $100,000 to buy Mansfield out of her Broadway contract so she could come to Hollywood. Fox's interest was not purely artistic. At the time, Marilyn Monroe was making the studio miserable, studying method acting with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York, starting her own production company, refusing to show up on set, demanding script approval. Fox needed leverage. They needed another blonde, someone they could point to and say, "See, we can replace you." Jayne Mansfield was ready-made. The studio signed her to a 7-year contract in 1956 and began grooming her alongside another actress, Cherie North, as Monroe's potential successor. Together with Mamie Van Doren at Universal, they became known informally as the 3 M's: Monroe, Mansfield, and Van Doren, a trio of curvaceous blonde bombshells competing for the same narrow space in the American imagination. Mansfield herself never seemed to mind the comparison. She played it like a long game, adopting Monroe's breathy vocal mannerisms, accepting roles that were essentially Monroe vehicles, and always making sure the cameras were pointed at her. But the competition ate at Monroe. People close to the star recalled her fury. Monroe once told a gossip columnist, "I know it's supposed to be flattering to be imitated, but she does it so grossly, so vulgarly. I wish I had some legal means to sue her." In 1956, Fox put her in The Girl Can't Help It, directed by Frank Tashlin, a former animator for Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies who brought a cartoonist sensibility to live-action filmmaking. Tashlin's Hollywood was loud, bright, and deliberately absurd. His camera turned human beings into cartoon characters and dared the audience to laugh at the excess. The movie was originally conceived as a showcase for Mansfield's figure, with a satirical subplot about the rock and roll craze that was sweeping the country. What it became, almost by accident, was one of the most important rock and roll films ever made. The plot was simple. A retired gangster, played by Edmund O'Brien, hires a washed-up talent agent, played by Tom Ewell, to turn his talentless girlfriend into a singing star. Mansfield played the girlfriend, Jerry Jordan, a woman so beautiful that physical objects in her presence ceased to function normally. The film featured live performances by Little Richard, Fats Domino, Gene Vincent, Eddie Cochran, and the Platters, a lineup that now reads like a Hall of Fame roster of early rock and roll. Julie London sang her sultry hit "Cry Me a River" in a scene that would be remembered for decades. But the image that seared itself into the culture was Mansfield's. In one scene, she walks down a city street carrying 2 milk bottles in front of her chest. As she passes, an ice delivery man's block of ice melts on the spot. A man's glasses shatter. The milk bottles explode in another man's hands. It is broad and absurd and intentionally cartoonish, and Mansfield plays it with a warmth and comedic timing that surprised everyone who had expected nothing more than a mannequin with measurements. François Truffaut, the French New Wave director, praised both the film and Mansfield's performance in his book of film criticism. The film reached Liverpool, England, by the spring of 1957. 2 teenagers named John Lennon and Paul McCartney snuck into a showing. Decades later, McCartney would say that the musical performances in The Girl Can't Help It were among the most formative experiences of his early life, that seeing Little Richard and Gene Vincent perform on screen was the moment rock and roll became real to him. It is one of the stranger footnotes in cultural history. The movie that launched Jayne Mansfield's film career may have also helped launch the Beatles. The Girl Can't Help It outgrossed Marilyn Monroe's Gentlemen Prefer Blondes from 3 years earlier. Mansfield won a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. She was 24 years old, and she was, for a brief, incandescent moment, the most photographed woman in America. Evangelist Billy Graham reportedly said, "This country knows more about Jayne Mansfield's statistics than the Second Commandment." Mansfield's response to this kind of attention was always the same knowing shrug. They're more interested in 40-20-135. There is a photograph from this period that has become one of the most famous images in Hollywood history. In April 1957, Paramount Pictures hosted a dinner at Romanoff's restaurant in Beverly Hills to welcome Italian actress Sophia Loren to Hollywood. Mansfield arrived late, wearing a backless, extremely low-cut satin dress, and sat down right next to the guest of honor. Photographers Delmar Watson and Joe Shear captured the moment, Loren looking sideways at Mansfield's cleavage with an expression that is somewhere between horror and fascination. The photograph was printed around the world. Nearly 60 years later, Loren recalled the moment to Entertainment Weekly. "I'm staring at her nipples because I am afraid they are about to come onto my plate," she said. "In my face, you can see the fear. But here is the detail that matters." Mansfield stared straight into the camera. She knew exactly what she was doing. She always did. But doing what she did required a bargain that could never be renegotiated. Mansfield gave the world the cartoon, and the world accepted it. And when she tried to offer anything else, the world was not interested. There is a moment from this period that captures the whole impossible bind. Mansfield appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and Carson, who was sharper than his genial manner suggested, looked at her and said, on air, "Nobody with an IQ of 160 can be that stupid." Mansfield sat there and pretended she did not understand what he was saying. She smiled the dumb blonde smile. She played the character. It was, depending on how you look at it, either the most disciplined piece of acting she ever did or the saddest. Film critic Roger Ebert wrote about this moment years later, observing that Mansfield remained composed, pretending she did not comprehend Carson's probing. Ebert noted that she did not have to act, in the conventional sense. She only had to stand there. But standing there, being that thing, maintaining that character when the whole world was telling her it was the only thing they wanted from her, that required something that looked nothing like stupidity. Consider this. In 1957, Mansfield appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the most watched programs in America. She could have played the bombshell. She could have done the breathy voice and the giggle and the exaggerated wiggle. Instead, she sat down and played Vivaldi's Concerto in A Minor on the violin. She also played a piece on the piano. Millions of Americans watched a woman they knew primarily for her measurements perform classical music on live television. It was a strange, quiet act of defiance, the real Jayne peeking out from behind the mask. On her first appearance on British television that same year, she recited from Shakespeare, including a passage from Hamlet. The British press did not know what to make of her. In 1957, Fox cast her in The Wayward Bus, adapted from a John Steinbeck novel, opposite Joan Collins and Dan Dailey. Mansfield played Camille Oakes, a weary burlesque dancer trying to leave the business. A woman who has learned to protect herself from being used by men, but whose heart is still open to the possibility of genuine love. She lowered the pitch of her voice, restrained her usual mannerisms, and delivered a performance that critics acknowledged was the best acting she had ever done. The New York Times called it generally conceded to have been her best acting in a career hampered by her flamboyant image, distinctive voice, a soft-voiced coo punctuated with squeals, voluptuous figure, and limited acting range. People who watched the film without knowing who was in it were often unable to identify the performer as Jayne Mansfield. She was that good when she was allowed to be. But the film received mediocre reviews overall and tepid box office returns, and Fox learned the lesson it wanted to learn. Audiences would pay for the cartoon, not the actress. The studio never gave her another dramatic role. It was the fork in the road, the moment when things could have gone differently, and did not. Mansfield won the Golden Globe for New Star of the Year for her combined work in The Girl Can't Help It and The Wayward Bus, beating Carol Baker and Natalie Wood. But the award recognized a promise that Hollywood had already decided not to keep. That same year, she reprised her Broadway role in the film version of Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, directed again by Tashlin, and Fox launched her with a grand 40-day promotional tour across England and 16 European countries. She met Queen Elizabeth II as part of the tour. In London, reporters followed her everywhere. In Paris, she was mobbed. She was, for a few months, treated like the biggest star in the world, which may have been the cruelest part of all because it made the years that followed so much harder to bear. Her fourth starring role in a Hollywood film was Kiss Them for Me, alongside Cary Grant. On paper, it should have been a triumph, the biggest blonde in America sharing the screen with the most elegant leading man in the business. The film was directed by Stanley Donen, who had made Singin' in the Rain. But in the film itself, Grant's character prefers a sleek, demure redhead played by fashion model Susie Parker, and Mansfield is little more than comic relief. Loud, brassy, and ultimately irrelevant to the story. The movie was, as one critic put it, vapid and ill-advised. It was a critical and commercial failure, and it marked a turning point. The pairing of Mansfield with Grant should have elevated her. Instead, it exposed the limits of the studio's interest in her. Fox wanted a body to put on posters. Grant wanted a scene partner. The two ambitions did not overlap. She also appeared on stage in acclaimed touring productions of Bus Stop and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, plays that had originally been associated with Marilyn Monroe. One critic, reviewing her performance as the chanteuse being abducted by a lonesome cowboy in Bus Stop, wrote that Mansfield can hardly help stealing scenes, but oftentimes the scenes are earned rather than stolen. It turns out the lady is endowed with a comedic talent. She made guest appearances on television, The Alfred Hitchcock Hour, The Jack Benny Program, Burke's Law, The Steve Allen Show, and by 1958, she was charging $20,000 per television appearance. She dabbled in music, releasing an album and recording singles. In 1967, in one of the stranger footnotes of her career, she collaborated with a young guitarist named Jimi Hendrix on 2 singles, Suey and As the Clouds Drift By. The records did not chart, but the pairing, the fading blonde bombshell and the ascending rock god, captures something about the transitional moment in American culture that Mansfield had the misfortune to straddle. She belonged to the 50s, and the 60s had no place for her. But even as her relationship with the studio frayed, Jayne had found something real. At a show in New York in late 1956, while she was still performing in Rock Hunter on Broadway, she met Mickey Hargitay, a Hungarian bodybuilder who had been crowned Mr. Universe in 1955 and was performing as one of Mae West's musclemen in West's nightclub act. They were an improbable match, the intellectual brunette pretending to be a dizzy blonde, and the former plumber and carpenter who could bench press a small car. But friends said their love was immediate and genuine. Mickey was not complicated the way the Hollywood men Jayne knew were complicated. He was strong, devoted, and he adored her without reservation. When Mae West discovered that her muscle man was falling for her rival blonde, she was furious. West called a press conference and ordered Hargitay to read a scripted statement denouncing his relationship with Mansfield. Her plan backfired magnificently. Instead of reading the statement, Mickey looked at the assembled reporters and said, "Jayne and I are very much in love, and we have seriously discussed marriage plans in the future." Mae West never forgave him. They married on January 13, 1958, at a glass chapel in Palos Verdes, California, a chapel with transparent walls so that fans and reporters could see the entire ceremony from outside. Fox was furious. The studio preferred its sex kittens unmarried, and Mansfield's decision to wed a bodybuilder against the studio's wishes was a small act of rebellion that carried large consequences. Fox retaliated by loaning her out to non-Fox productions. The studio collected $200,000 in fees for these loanouts, but paid Mansfield only her regular contract salary of $2,500 a week. It was not an equitable arrangement for one of the studio's featured players. But the marriage proved to be good business in a different way. Mickey and Jayne became a performing team, headlining together at the Tropicana Las Vegas in a striptease revue called the Tropicana Holiday. The opening night raised $20,000 for the March of Dimes. Mansfield earned $25,000 a week for the show, 10 times what Fox was paying her. She took out a $1 million insurance policy with Lloyd's of London in case Mickey dropped her during one of his acrobatic lifts. By 1960, they had moved on to the Dunes Hotel, where they headlined an act called The House of Love. Mansfield earned $35,000 a week there. 20th Century Fox Records recorded the show for an album titled Jayne Mansfield Busts Up Las Vegas. The nightclub circuit was not the movies, but it paid better than Fox ever had, and it allowed Mansfield to control her own career for the first time. When Mansfield's grandfather died on January 2, 1957, she inherited a substantial sum, more than $81,000, with which she bought the 40-room Mediterranean mansion at 10100 Sunset Boulevard in Holmby Hills that had once belonged to Rudy Vallee. Mickey, drawing on his pre-Hollywood skills as a plumber and carpenter, helped rebuild the place from the ground up. Jayne painted the entire house pink. Pink walls, pink carpets, pink shag on the ceilings. A pink heart-shaped bathtub with gold swan head faucets and a pink marble vanity decorated with cupids and hearts. Pink fluorescent lights surrounded every cherub. A fountain in the entryway spurted pink champagne for guests. Mickey built a heart-shaped swimming pool in the backyard and lined it with gold mosaic tiles that spelled out, "I love you, Jayne." The master bedroom had emerald green satin sheets contrasting the fluffy pink carpet and a fireplace with a heart-shaped opening. The library, in a rare concession to restraint, was merely lavish. In a stroke of promotional genius that revealed the intelligence behind the persona, Mansfield had written to more than 1,500 furniture and building suppliers, offering them the chance to say their products were in the home of Jayne Mansfield, and she received over $150,000 worth of free merchandise, furniture, fixtures, appliances, carpeting, paying only $76,000 for the mansion itself at a time when the average American house cost under $7,500. She called it her Pink Palace, and it became as much a part of her public identity as the platinum hair and the measurements. She would step onto the balcony nearly every day and wave to the tour buses that passed below on Sunset Boulevard, like a well-endowed monarch greeting subjects from the ramparts of her kingdom. The Pink Palace was not merely a house. It was a performance, a three-dimensional advertisement for the idea of Jayne Mansfield. Every detail was calculated to generate photographs, to give the press a backdrop, to make the private life as spectacular as the public one. But it was also, in a way that became clear only later, a cage. The character she had created required constant feeding. The appearances, the stunts, the photos, the parties at the heart-shaped pool, and the house was both the stage and the prison. She could not leave the character behind because the character lived where she lived. The Pink Palace. Remember it. It will come back, and when it does, it will mean something different. Between 1958 and 1961, Jayne and Mickey had 3 children together: Miklos, Zoltan, and Mariska, or so the world believed. The family, combined with the Vegas act and the Pink Palace, created an image of domestic contentment that the public loved. There were photo spreads in Life magazine, shot by photographer Alan Grant in 1960, showing the couple lounging in their absurd pink paradise. Mickey, shirtless and massive, beside Jayne in a bikini, surrounded by children and dogs and heart-shaped everything. It looked like a dream, and for a while, perhaps it was. But the film career was already slipping, and the speed of the fall was remarkable. In January 1958, Mansfield's marriage to Hargitay aggravated Fox further. Peeved studio executives retaliated by loaning their nonconformist star to non-Fox productions, collecting $200,000 in fees while paying Mansfield only her regular contract salary of $1,500 to $2,500 a week. It was not an equitable arrangement, and Mansfield knew it. By 1959, Fox effectively stopped promoting her, and the studio eventually dropped her contract altogether to focus on bringing Marilyn Monroe back into the fold. The blonde replacement was no longer needed. The original was coming home. What followed was a slow, scattering decline that happened not in one dramatic collapse, but in a series of small erosions, each one minor on its own, each one taking something away. The film roles dried up. Fox loaned her out for 2 gangster thrillers shot in England, Too Hot to Handle and The Challenge, then sent her to Greece for an Olympic-themed picture called It Happened in Athens, which would not be released until 1962. Despite receiving top billing, Mansfield was relegated to a scantily clad supporting role. By 1960, she was making personal appearances for everything from supermarket openings to drugstore promotions, showing up anywhere that would pay. She appeared at county fairs and auto shows and shopping center ribbon cuttings. Each one paid a few hundred or a few $1,000s, and each one was a small step further from the person she had wanted to be. In the Pink Palace, the heart-shaped pool still gleamed, but the fairy tale was cracking. Mansfield's wardrobe increasingly relied on the shapeless styles of the early 1960s to hide the weight she had gained after her pregnancies. She still drew crowds wherever she went, still generated headlines, still commanded the attention of every camera in the room. But the attention had changed. It was no longer the attention of a rising star. It was the attention of a spectacle. In August 1962, Marilyn Monroe was found dead of a barbiturate overdose at her home in Los Angeles. She was 36 years old. The woman Mansfield had been hired to replace, the woman whose voice she had borrowed and whose shadow she had lived in for 7 years, was gone. Monroe's death did not revive Mansfield's career. If anything, It sealed it. Hollywood did not need two dead blonde bombshells. It needed one, and Monroe had gotten there first. The myth machine that had compared them in life would compare them in death, and Mansfield would always be second, the understudy who never got to take the stage. In 1963, she made her most desperate bid yet for relevance. She agreed to appear nude in the comedy Promises, Promises, becoming the first major American actress to perform a nude scene in a starring film role since the silent era. Photographs from the set were published in Playboy. It made headlines everywhere, but the headlines were the wrong kind. Critics said she was done, that she was debasing herself, that whatever talent she had possessed was being traded for one last round of attention. The publicity machine that Mansfield had operated so brilliantly for 8 years was now operating on her, grinding the gears in the wrong direction. Film critic Whitney Williams wrote of her in Variety that year, "Her personal life outrivaled any of the roles she played." There was one role she turned down during this period that says more about her than almost anything else in the public record. In 1964, the producers of a new television comedy called Gilligan's Island offered her the role of Ginger Grant, a glamorous, shipwrecked movie star. The role was a direct parody of the kind of blonde bombshell that Mansfield and Monroe had made famous. Mansfield refused it. She said the part epitomized the stereotype she was trying to escape. The role went to Tina Louise. It is one of those decisions that seems inexplicable from the outside. A failing actress turning down steady work on a network television show. Until you understand that Jayne Mansfield, the supposedly dumb blonde, was still trying, even at her lowest, to be taken seriously. She was still trying to prove that there was more to her than the character she had invented, and there was more. In 1963, at the height of the civil rights movement, Mansfield made headlines by attending a fundraiser at a racially integrated club in Birmingham, Alabama, despite bomb threats and protests. It was a small act, perhaps, in the larger sweep of the movement, but it was an act that carried real risk for a public figure whose career depended on the goodwill of a largely white, largely conservative audience. The NAACP praised her for her courage. It is worth noting that this gesture, quiet, principled, and largely forgotten, came from a woman the world had decided was nothing more than a pair of measurements. Her marriage to Mickey was fracturing under the weight of long separations, financial stress, and the relentless demands of maintaining a public image. They separated, reconciled, separated again. People who were close to them during this period often said that Mickey was the one person who had seen the real Jayne, the woman behind the character, and that losing him was the loss she could not recover from. She later said of their marriage, "We were into something so beautiful. Mickey and I had a grasp of life that most people never know anything about." In 1963, while they were apart, Mansfield began a relationship with Nelson Sardelli, a Brazilian-born Italian singer and comedian she met after one of his performances in Atlanta. Sardelli was a dashing Las Vegas entertainer who had gotten his start as an opening act for Judy Garland. According to Sardelli's own account, given decades later in Mariska Hargitay's documentary, Mansfield told him within 45 minutes of their first meeting that he would give her the Italian child she had always wanted. The affair was intense, but brief. On April 30, 1963, Mansfield obtained a divorce from Mickey Hargitay in Juarez, Mexico. Sardelli accompanied her to the border town, but the relationship ended in June 1963, and Mansfield, already pregnant, reconciled with Mickey before the baby was born. On January 23, 1964, she gave birth to a daughter. The birth certificate named Mickey Hargitay as the father. The girl was given the name Mariska Magdalena Hargitay. She was raised as Mickey's daughter. She grew up believing she was Mickey's daughter. She would not learn the truth until she was 25 years old, and she would not speak the truth publicly until she was 61. The divorce from Mickey was finalized in 1964, though they had briefly reconciled before Mariska's birth. That same year, Mansfield married her third husband, a film director of Italian origin named Matt Cimber, born Thomas Vitale Ottaviano. During their marriage, Mansfield's youngest child was known as Maria rather than Mariska, reflecting Cimber's Italian heritage. They had a son, Antonio, born in October 1965. The marriage was troubled from the start. Friends from that period said Mansfield was drinking heavily. She was taking diet pills. By some accounts, she had tried LSD. People who visited the Pink Palace during this time described an atmosphere of glamorous decay. The house still spectacular, but no longer maintained with the manic care of its early years. Toys scattered through rooms that had once been photographed for magazines. The champagne fountain dry. Cimber filed for divorce in 1966, citing her infidelities and her alcoholism. Then came Sam Brody. Brody was the married lawyer handling Mansfield's divorce from Cimber, and by July 1966 they were living together. He was her attorney and her de facto manager, and he was, by nearly every account, a destructive force in her life. Brody's own wife, Beverly, filed for divorce and called Mansfield the 41st other woman in Brody's life, a number that, even accounting for the bitterness of a divorcing spouse, suggests something about the man's character. People who knew them described the relationship as volatile and corrosive. Brody drank. He had a violent temper. He had frequent drunken brawls with Mansfield in public. According to accounts from Mansfield's children and her ex-husband Mickey, which surfaced publicly in the 2025 documentary My Mom Jayne, Mansfield showed signs of having been physically abused. Bruises, marks, the kind of evidence that people noticed, but that nobody in 1966 knew quite how to address. Brody also mistreated Mansfield's eldest daughter, Jayne Marie, who was a teenager by this time. Friends and family tried to intervene. Mickey Hargitay, who still loved his ex-wife despite everything, tried to reach her. They could not get through. Brody had isolated her. In November 1966, 6-year-old Zoltan Hargitay was visiting the theme park Jungleland USA in Thousand Oaks, California, with his mother when a lion attacked him. The animal bit the boy on the head and neck, clamping its jaws around his skull. Zoltan suffered severe head trauma, underwent 3 surgeries at Community Memorial Hospital in Ventura, including a 6-hour brain operation, and contracted meningitis. For days, doctors were not certain he would survive. He did, eventually, making what was considered a remarkable recovery. Brody, in his capacity as the family's lawyer, sued the theme park for $1.6 million. When Anton LaVey heard about the attack, he performed what he described as a healing ritual on a mountaintop, and when the boy recovered, Mansfield publicly credited LaVey with the result. It was impossible to tell, as it was always impossible to tell with Mansfield, whether she believed what she was saying or whether she was simply feeding the publicity machine one more story. It was around this time that Mansfield's life took its strangest turn. In the fall of 1966, Mansfield attended the San Francisco Film Festival. While there, she visited the home of Anton LaVey, the self-proclaimed founder and high priest of the Church of Satan, which he had established on Walpurgisnacht, April 30th, earlier that year. LaVey was a former carnival worker and organist who had fashioned himself into a theatrical embodiment of the occult, complete with a shaved head, a black cape, an inverted pentagram, and a pet lion. He lived in a house he called the Black House, and he held weekly theatrical performances that drew curious visitors from across San Francisco. His philosophy, stripped of the costume, was essentially a celebration of individualism and self-expression, closer to Ayn Rand than to any medieval demonology. Whether Mansfield was genuinely interested in LaVey's philosophy or simply saw him as another publicity opportunity is something that has never been settled. The two had things in common. Both were masters of self-invention. Both understood that provocation was currency, and both were addicted to cameras. Mansfield told reporters, "I think he is a genius, and I regard him as an interesting person. I am a Catholic and would not believe in his church." But LaVey awarded her the title of High Priestess of San Francisco's Church of Satan, and the two were photographed together numerous times. At the downtown Los Angeles restaurant La Scala, at the Pink Palace beside the heart-shaped pool. The media devoured it. Headlines called her a devil worshipper. It was, in its way, a final masterstroke of publicity, the aging sex symbol and the high priest of Satan. Nobody could stop talking about it. Here is the detail that turned gossip into legend. According to several accounts, Sam Brody accompanied Mansfield to the Black House during one of their visits and, in a fit of jealousy or contempt, destroyed some of LaVey's ceremonial objects. One version of the story says Brody lit a forbidden candle on LaVey's altar. Another says he simply picked up and smashed something on the altar table. LaVey, incensed, reportedly looked at Mansfield and told her that Brody's irreverence had summoned a curse from Satan. The lawyer, LaVey declared, would die in a car accident within a year. In one widely repeated account, he said, "My power exceeds anything you can imagine, and now you're going to feel it." Over the following months, Brody was involved in 6 separate car accidents and near-fatal crashes. The 7th would be the last, for both of them. Was Mansfield a practicing Satanist? It seems unlikely. At the time of her death, she was reportedly in the process of converting to Judaism for Brody. LaVey's daughter Carla claimed in a 1992 interview on Joan Rivers's talk show that Mansfield was a genuine member of the church and that she and LaVey had been romantically involved. But LaVey was a professional mythmaker who capitalized on his association with Mansfield for the rest of his life. After her death, he held a memorial service for her at the Black House and expressed public remorse for the curse on Brody, claiming that Mansfield had been unintentionally caught in its reach. It was the kind of thing a publicist would say, and LaVey had always been, at heart, a publicist. He died 30 years later, in 1997, of pulmonary edema. His daughter Zena would later claim that his death too was the result of a curse, one she had placed on him. The last months of Mansfield's life were a blur of motion and exhaustion. In early 1967, she spent 2 months touring South Vietnam, entertaining American troops. In March, she flew to the British Isles for a cabaret tour. When she arrived in London and was met by a reception fit for a visiting star, she wept. It had been a long time since Jayne Mansfield received the star treatment. Her press secretary Raymond Straight later wrote in his book, The Tragic Secret Life of Jayne Mansfield. The tour paid $56,000, and Mansfield was given a chauffeured Rolls-Royce. But Straight described the work bluntly. The end of the line, the coal yards, the docks, wherever there was audience. The venues were working men's clubs in Yorkshire, variety halls in small English villages, places that would never have appeared on the itinerary of a star at the height of her fame. But the locals didn't care that her Hollywood career was finished. One British journalist reported that Mansfield had vamped and crooned her way through England, and that audiences were thrilled to have a real-life Hollywood sex symbol, faded or not, standing in their midst. Back in America, the decline continued in small, almost imperceptible ways. She appeared in 2 films in 1966 that even her most devoted fans struggled to defend. The Fat Spy, a comedy starring Phyllis Diller, and The Las Vegas Hillbillies, a musical that co-starred Mamie Van Doren. She toured the country in small-town productions of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. She filmed her last role, a brief cameo in A Guide for the Married Man, a comedy starring Walter Matthau. In the scene, she plays a nameless woman in a one-night stand with Terry Thomas's character. The entire bit revolves around the fact that they cannot find her bra. It was her last appearance on film. In June 1967, 10 days before her death, Mansfield appeared on The Joey Bishop Show. It was her final television appearance. On the show, she recited a poem by the 17th century English poet Robert Herrick. The poem was called To the Virgins, to Make Much of Time. It is a poem about seizing the day, about the brevity of life. It contains the line, "And this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying." Jayne Mansfield was 34 years old. On the evening of June 28, 1967, she performed 2 shows at the Gus Stevens Supper Club in Biloxi, Mississippi. Employees at the club told reporters afterward that it was her best show yet. After midnight, the party left for New Orleans, where Mansfield was scheduled to appear the following day on WDSU's midday show. She planned to stay at the Roosevelt Hotel. In the car were Mansfield, Sam Brody, the 19-year-old driver, Ronnie Harrison, who worked for the Gus Stevens Club, Mansfield's 3 children with Mickey Hargitay, 8-year-old Mickey Jr., 6-year-old Zoltan and 3-year-old Mariska, and 4 chihuahuas. On the way, Mansfield called Mickey Hargitay from a gas station phone booth. He told her he was flying to New Orleans later that day to see the children and be together. Through the receiver, he could hear Brody's voice, jealous and agitated, in the background. It was the last time Mickey Hargitay spoke to the mother of his children. At approximately 2:25 in the morning of June 29th, on a dark stretch of Highway 91 mile west of the Rigolette's Bridge, a 2-lane road through miles of marshland, 1 lane in each direction, divided by a yellow stripe with no phone poles or electric lights nearby, the Buick Electra slammed into the rear of a tractor-trailer. The truck had slowed from 50 to 35 miles an hour because a mosquito fogging machine was spraying insecticide ahead of it, its red light flashing through a thick white chemical cloud that hung in the humid Louisiana air. The Buick, traveling between 60 and 80 miles an hour, went under the trailer. The underside of the trailer sheared the top of the car clean off. The engine was twisted sideways by the impact. Mansfield, Brody, and Harrison died instantly. 2 of the 4 chihuahuas also died. The coroner's report listed Mansfield's cause of death as crushed skull with avulsion of the cranium and brain. She was not decapitated, despite the rumor that would persist for decades, fueled by photographs showing what appeared to be blonde hair tangled in the crumpled windshield. The coroner who performed the autopsy stated definitively in later recollections, quoted in his obituary in the New Orleans Times-Picayune, that Mansfield's head was intact on her neck, though severely traumatized, particularly along the upper forehead and hairline where she had been, in the clinical term, scalped. The blonde mass in the photographs was a wig or a hairpiece. She had been a natural brunette her entire life, which is something most people did not know, and which gives the rumor an almost poetic cruelty. Even in death, the disguise created confusion. The 3 children, asleep in the back seat, survived with minor injuries. Mariska, the youngest, was found beneath the passenger seat, where she had been thrown by the impact. She was rescued with a zigzag scar on her forehead that she would carry for the rest of her life. Her brother Zoltan, who had already survived being mauled by a lion less than 8 months earlier, later said in the documentary My Mom Jayne that his mother had switched seats during the ride. She had been sitting in the back with the children, but moved to the front at some point during the journey. Zoltan reflected that if she had stayed in the back, she might have survived. Mansfield's funeral took place on July 3, 1967, in Penargyle, Pennsylvania, the small town in the Slate Belt region where her maternal grandfather had been involved in the slate industry and where her father was buried. Hundreds of people lined the main street. The service at Fairview Cemetery was small and private. Among the dozens of floral wreaths was one from Bob Hope, who had worked with Mansfield on USO tours and television specials. A sex symbol who absorbed publicity like a sponge? Hope said later to May Mann, a friend and biographer of Mansfield's. Yes, but there was an underlying sweetness and femininity about Jayne. Hope compared Mansfield to Monroe. They had sympathetic personalities. This was the main reason for their popularity. The public sensed their softness and vulnerability. Of Mansfield's 3 ex-husbands, only Mickey Hargitay attended the funeral. In the aftermath, 2 wrongful death lawsuits were filed by Mansfield's eldest daughter, Jayne Marie, and by Matt Cimber. After a 16-day investigation and trial in 1971, the driver of the tractor-trailer was found not to have acted negligently, but the mosquito-fogging vehicle operator was found to have been negligent in creating the conditions that caused the truck to slow down. The case brought national attention to a lethal design flaw. There was nothing on the back of a semi-trailer to prevent a smaller car from sliding underneath it. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration subsequently mandated that all semi-trailers be fitted with rear underride guards, heavy steel bars bolted to the back of the trailer, designed to catch a car's bumper and prevent it from going under. The trucking industry fought the regulation throughout the 1970s and 1980s, but it eventually became federal law. These bars are still required on every tractor-trailer in America. They are called Mansfield bars. It is, depending on how you look at it, either the most fitting or the most ironic legacy imaginable. The woman who spent her life being known for her body is now known, in federal transportation law, for a piece of steel. Mansfield's estate was initially estimated at $600,000, including the Pink Palace, valued at $100,000, a sports car that sold for $7,000, her jewelry collection, and $185,000 from Sam Brody's estate, which he had left to her in his will. Beverly Brody, Sam's estranged wife, sued the Mansfield estate in 1971 for $325,000 worth of presents and jewelry that Sam had given to Mansfield. The suit was settled out of court. But when Mansfield's first 4 children, Jayne Marie, Mickey Jr., Zoltan, and Mariska, went to court in 1977 to claim their inheritance, they discovered that some $500,000 in debt that Mansfield had accumulated, combined with years of legal battles among competing claimants, had left the estate completely insolvent. There was nothing left. The woman who had once furnished a 40-room mansion with $150,000 in free merchandise left her children nothing. The Pink Palace itself passed through a succession of owners, each one inheriting not just the house but the strange aura that clung to it. Ringo Starr lived there for a time. So did Mama Cass Elliot of the Mamas and the Papas. Starr reportedly told friends that no matter how many times he painted the walls white, the pink always bled through, which may have had less to do with ghosts than with the crushed pink rock that Mansfield had mixed into the exterior plaster during the original renovation. In 1976, British pop singer Engelbert Humperdinck, who had met Mansfield in London just 2 weeks before the fatal crash and been invited to the Pink Palace, bought the mansion site unseen. He restored the exterior to its original pink, and later said he frequently smelled Mansfield's familiar rose petal perfume in the halls. "Once I saw a figure in a long black dress in front of me," he told reporters. "It was Jayne, but it wasn't frightening." In 2002, the Pink Palace was sold to a businessman who demolished it to enlarge his own property. "Seeing it demolished was like losing a member of the community," one Hollywood historian said. "There was nothing else like it." Before the wrecking crew arrived, Mansfield's sons were allowed inside to retrieve a petrified wood fireplace that their father had built. They also took a copper fireplace hood that Mickey Hargitay had made for Jayne. It bore an engraved inscription: "Janie, my love will flame for you forever. Mickey." The Pink Palace is gone now. It is a parking lot. Mariska Hargitay grew up in the care of Mickey Hargitay and his third wife, Ellen Ciano. Mickey died in 2006. Mariska had almost no memory of her mother. "I don't have any memories of her," she said in the documentary. As a child, she was embarrassed by Mansfield's sex kitten image, by the photographs she would see in books and fan magazines. As she grew older, curiosity replaced embarrassment. She noticed that she did not quite look like her siblings, that there was something she could not name that set her apart. "He was my everything, my idol," she said of Mickey. "He loved me so much, and I knew it. I also knew something else. I just didn't know what I knew." When she was 25 years old, while visiting the New Jersey home of Sabin Gray, the president of the Jayne Mansfield fan club, she was shown a scrapbook. Gray asked casually, "Do you want to see a photo of Nelson?" Mariska did not know who Nelson was. Gray went white, stammered that it was probably nothing, that it probably was not true. Mariska opened the scrapbook and looked at a photograph of Nelson Sardelli, a Brazilian-born Italian singer who had had a brief affair with her mother in 1963. She knew immediately. "It was like the floor fell out from underneath me," she would say decades later, "like my infrastructure dissolved." She saw her own face in the face of a man she had never met. Mickey Hargitay was not her biological father. He never had been. Mansfield, fearing that a child born out of wedlock would damage her career, what was left of it, had reconciled with Mickey before Mariska was born, and put his name on the birth certificate. It was another managed story, another controlled narrative, another version of reality that Jayne Mansfield had written for the world. Mariska did not speak publicly about this for more than 30 years. She eventually met Sardelli when she was 30, after seeing him perform in Atlantic City, and formed a quiet relationship with him and his 2 other daughters, whom she referred to publicly as family friends. The secret sat inside her like a stone. "I grew up where I was supposed to," she told Vanity Fair in 2025. "I'm Mickey Hargitay's daughter. That is not a lie." She called her documentary about her mother, My Mom Jayne, a kind of love letter to the man who raised her. "Because there's no one that I was closer to on this planet." But in the film, which premiered at the Cannes Film Festival in May 2025 and was nominated for the L'Oeil d'Or Prize, she told the whole story. She spoke about Nelson Sardelli for the first time on camera. She interviewed him in his home. She sat with his daughters, her half-sisters Giovanna and Pietra, the women she had kept hidden for decades. "I made them secrets," she said, her voice breaking. "It's so heartbreaking to me. I'm not good with lies. So I also made this movie to unburden all of us." Sardelli, who was 90 years old at the time of the documentary's release, was delighted to finally be acknowledged. "My birth father was thrilled," Mariska said on the Today Show in June 2025. "Because he'd been living with this secret too, all these years." This is the payload of the Jayne Mansfield story, the revelation that reframes everything. It is not that Mariska Hargitay's father was someone other than the man who raised her. It is that Jayne Mansfield, at the lowest point of her life, facing the disintegration of her career and her marriage and her public image, did what she had always done. She managed the story. She controlled the narrative. She chose the version of reality that the world would see, and she made it stick. She had been doing it since she was 21 years old, since the day she bleached her hair and invented the dumb blonde who spoke 5 languages. She did it with the bikini that fell off. She did it with the dress at Romanoff's. She did it with the pink house and the heart-shaped pool. And she did it one last time with her youngest daughter's birth certificate, writing a name she knew was not true because the truth would have cost her the only thing she had left, the story. Mansfield was buried beside her father in Fairview Cemetery in Penn Argyl, Pennsylvania, the man who died of a heart attack in a car when she was 3, and the woman who died in a car when she was 34. She left behind 5 children, a crumbling estate, an insolvent fortune, and a name that the federal government would eventually stamp onto the back of every semi-truck in America. In 1968, the Hollywood Publicists Guild announced a new annual prize, the Jayne Mansfield Award, given to the actress who received the most media exposure and publicity in a given year. Raquel Welch was the first winner. It was fitting, and it was not enough. In 2000, Mansfield's 97-year-old mother, Vera Peers, was interred alongside her daughter and her first husband, 3 generations of Palmers in the same small Pennsylvania cemetery, far from Sunset Boulevard, far from the Pink Palace, far from the lights. On a June evening not long before she died, Jayne Mansfield sat with her friend May Mann at the Pink Palace, the mansion that was already falling apart, the symbol of a life that was already fading. "There isn't anyone," she said, "no matter who or what they have done to me, that I don't love." It is the kind of thing a person says when they have given everything away and have nothing left to protect. The Pink Palace is a parking lot now. The Mansfield bars are on every truck. The scar on Mariska's forehead has faded but never disappeared. And somewhere in the archive of late-night television, there is footage of a 34-year-old woman reciting a 17th century poem about flowers that smile today and die tomorrow. She is sitting in a studio chair. The lights are on her. She knows every word.